Hi everyone, I'm Yola and this is Moheb, and today we'll be presenting workers' poverty and precarity. We're gonna be explaining the terms you should know, followed by the main points in the reading. Furthermore, we're gonna talk about poverty and Egypt, precarity, and steel workers versus Al Tababna, Helwan and Egyptian Iron and Steel Company, and last but not least, the concept of riz and its importance in the reading.
We will start off by defining a couple of important terms. First is poverty. What is poverty? It's not having enough material possessions or income for a person's need. Poverty is divided into two types: relative poverty and absolute poverty. Absolute poverty is when a person earns less than the required income to survive about the poverty line. Relative poverty, on the other hand, depends on where you are and your surroundings. So, for example, $5 a day in a poor country is considered a lot of money, but if you gain the same amount in a more developed country, then you will be considered poor. Marginality is a concept that describes one thing being affected when another changes slightly. Exclusion is when you're detached from social relations, preventing yourself from fully participating in the normal activities in your society. Neoliberalism is an important term in today's lecture. Neo comes from new, and liberalism is where the market controls most of the transactions in a free market. The shift away from state welfare provision. Trickle down growth will be discussed thoroughly in the next slide, but it is when the economy grows, therefore, poverty in the return will be reduced. Prec- Precarity is lacking in predictability, job security, and material welfare. The reading tackles two important points. The first one is the importance of how poverty is reproduced, and the second one is how marginality and exclusion are not incidental to capitalist society but are systematically part of it, meaning that poverty is reproduced, that people are being actively deprived of land, income, wealth, and that poverty is not just a result of growth and being left on the margins, but that it is a crucial part of the market. Poverty is usually seen as a huge developmental problem that can be solved by policy interventions. However, history in Egypt has shown that this is not the case. It's always assumed when people look at the mainstream economic theory, which states that marginalization and poverty are temporary, and with economic growth and development, the poor will be incorporated into work and therefore poverty will be reduced. However, Bush disagrees and believes that marginality and exclusion are part of the capitalist society and not incidental. That through economic growth and trying to grow, the poor does not get richer. However, the rich are getting richer. The poor may be earning more, but that doesn't necessarily mean that poverty is reduced or no longer exists in the society. For example, to simplify things a bit more, in a society there are two kinds of people, A and B. A earn $1 a day and B earn $2 a day. In other words, A people live under the poverty line, but the $2 is still not that enough, but are above the poverty line. Now imagine that the economy has boomed, and the year after, people A earn $2 a day and people B earn $10 a day. So now you can say that the poverty has been completely demolished because everyone in the society is earning above $1. But if you look at it, people A's income only doubled over a year, but people B are now earning five times more. Therefore, now there is a larger gap between the two than before. Yes, everyone is earning more money, but the gap is larger. Therefore, this contradicts the mainstream economic theory and explains simply how it doesn't always apply, or that looking deep into an economic growth may show that even though the country is developing, it is not necessary that the population is also developing. Usually, when the Egyptian government tries to establish economic growth, they prioritize it, but instead of trying to implement effective policies of redistribution and boost economic incomes of the rural and urban poor, they tend to go to foreign lending and use the mainstream economic theory. Usually, the policies implemented are working towards making the better of better and disposes the workers and poor people. For example, the tenancy laws in Egypt that kicked off the peasants from their lands and gave them new landowners This supports the idea of poverty is not an incident, it's part of the capitalist society. Therefore, as mentioned in the reading, there are only definite winners and definite losers. The rich only become richer and the poor remain poorer, and the gap keeps on increasing.
Precarity. Al-Tababna were dragged into the negative stereotype of troublemakers due to the extreme precarity they endured. Let me give you a little bit of a background of Al-Tababna. Al-Tababna were driven off their land to the margins of the company town Al-Tibn. They occupied informal housing called Biyut Ahaliya, which mean family-built houses. And they stressed their total dependence on rizq. It's the most crucial part of their work. Al-Tababna were given this stereotypical troublemaker reputation because of the harsh consequences they were put in. Like, for example, they weren't like other workers, stable workers who have healthcare rights and contractual and stable pay for them. And the environment they were forced to work in was not adequate for the workers. For example, the machinery was very old, it was not updated, and they had very low quality for spare parts in the shop. And the blue-collar workers and engineers were pitted against each other. Moreover, the pay of a daily worker was lower than the daily pay in industrial and construction work. So the IASCO, or Egyptian Iron and Steel Company, I really don't know how to pronounce it, salaries were not tempting enough for the Al-Tababna people. Moreover, on the extremely precarious conditions Al-Tababna people were exposed to, when they were removed from their land to allow them to resettle in the company town, they were denied access to privileged jobs. And last but not least, the very few jobs that were left were obtained by the steelworkers' children, thus leaving no opportunities or advantage to Al-Tababna people. Al-Tababna people relied on their rizq, and they wanted to leave that rizq for their children. So when the only jobs that were left without any occupation, they wanted them for their children. But even that was taken from them and given to the steel workers. Steel workers versus Al-Tababna. The Muwazzaf referred to as a person who owns a wazifa, while Urzaki, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but while Urzaki are referred to the people of Al-Tababna who rely on rizq solely. The steel workers were the Muwazzafin. They had the same beliefs, they were exactly similar, but they weren't solely dependent on rizq, while Al-Tababna were. The Urzaki relied entirely on the rizq and sustenance from God. The steel workers and the workers in the plant both are at opposite ends, obviously, of the hierarchy of labor. They lead different life cycles, and they have different household structures, and they have different hopes and desires and aspirations from each other. For example, about their life cycles, Muwazzafin work later in life and marry later than the Urzaki. Their households are smaller, and the consumer goods they own and spouses they choose are completely different. Moreover, Al-Tababna often mistake rizq for haz. Haz means luck, and the religious workers associated rizq and nasib when it came to marriage. Last, the steel workers are subjected to less precarity compared to Al-Tababna people. Yes, the steel workers experienced precarity, but compared to Al-Tababna people, there was actually no comparison. Helwan and IASCO. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but it's the Egyptian Iron and Steel Company. I'm gonna give you a background about Helwan. It emerged under President Nasser in 1950. The International Iron and Steel Company was its main landmark and largest factory in Egypt till now. As I said, the Muwazzafin, which are the steel workers, rely on their work, and have the same beliefs as the Urzaki, that sustenance comes from God, but they don't rely on it and they're not dependent on it. Steel workers' permanent jobs are losing economic value, and there were the daily wage workers in Helwan with absolute precarity and complete belief in Riz, who are living on the fringes of the plant. Riz. Each group differs starting with their cosmological and religious beliefs. Each one views Riz in a different way, and how they view it can tell you a lot about how vulnerable they are. Riz is unpredictable and irregular. It is distributed by God alone. Steelworkers don't rely on Riz. They understand that it's God's provision and sustenance, but they are not dependent on it. Al-Tababna, also called Urzaki, believe that sustenance comes from God without reciprocation from man and rely solely on it. Religious workers believe that they work hard so that their rizq would be halal and aim to improve their lives while accepting what God has given to them. This is a part I read in the reading that, in my opinion, really showed the difference between Urzaki and Muzzafin's beliefs.
Thank you for listening to our presentation.